The bridge of New Horizon felt different now that it was empty of most of its crew, and Jake Morrison sat in the captain's chair with Lisa, parked beside him while they watched the alien construct growing larger on the main screen, and he could feel its terrible presence pressing against his mind like a weight that threatened to crush his thoughts. Ben. Rodriguez's voice crackled over the intercom from the engineering deck. Captain, all systems are ready for reactor overload, and I bypassed all the safety protocols, and once you input the authorization codes, we'll have 10 minutes before the explosion. Jake looked at the tactical display and saw that the escape pods were still too close to the ship, and if he triggered the explosion, now the blast would destroy them along with New Horizon and the alien entity. The pods need more time to get clear, he said to Lisa, who was monitoring their progress on her console. We can give them maybe another 20 minutes, but after that, the entity will be close enough to start draining the evacuated colonists. Lisa, replied Jake, felt the alien presence push deeper into his consciousness, and suddenly he could hear whispers in a language that was not made of words, but of pure thought. And the voice spoke of hunger and loneliness and an eternity of waiting in the darkness. Between stars, it's trying to communicate with us, he said to Lisa while fighting to maintain his mental barriers. Lisa nodded grimly. I can hear it too, and it's showing me images of worlds it has consumed and billions of minds trapped in some kind of psychic prison. The whispers grew louder and more insistent, and Jake began to see flashes of the entity's memories stretching back millions of years. And it had traveled from galaxy to galaxy, feeding on any form of consciousness it could find, and always leaving empty worlds behind. It doesn't understand us, Lisa said suddenly. It keeps trying to separate our minds, but it can't figure out how to break the connection between us. Doctor. Kim's voice came over the intercom from the medical bay, where he had remained behind to study the entity. Captain, I'm detecting massive energy fluctuations from the construct, and it appears to be having difficulty processing your combined consciousness. Jake felt a spark of hope. Maya, are you still monitoring our brain patterns? Yes, Captain, and your neural activity is unlike anything I've ever seen, and it's as if your minds are somehow linked at a quantum level, Doctor. Chun replied from her station in the medical bay. The alien entity drew closer, and Jake could see details of its surface now, and it was covered with what looked like veins of pulsing energy, and he realized that each vein probably represented the consciousness of some creature it had consumed over the millennia. Those are minds, Lisa whispered in horror. All those lights are the thoughts and memories of beings it has trapped. The entity sent another psychic probe toward the ship, and this time Jake and Lisa joined hands and focused on their connection to each other, and something extraordinary happened, and instead of the probe penetrating their defenses, it seemed to recoil as if burned by their combined emotional bond. Did you feel that? Lisa asked. It hurt the thing somehow, and our connection actually caused it pain, Jake replied. Dar. Kim's excited voice came over the intercom. Captain, whatever you just did caused a massive disruption in the entity's energy field, and I think your emotional bond is somehow toxic to its feeding mechanism. Jake stood up from his command chair and pulled Lisa to her feet. If our bond can hurt it, then maybe we don't need to destroy the ship. But even as he spoke, the entity recovered from its momentary confusion and sent a much stronger probe toward New Horizon, and this time the psychic. Pressure was so intense that alarms began sounding throughout the ship as crew members collapsed at their stations. It's adapting, Lisa said through gritted teeth. As she fought against the mental intrusion, it's learning how to overcome our defenses. Jake realized that they were running out of time, and the entity was too powerful for just two people to resist, even with their strong emotional connection, and soon it would break through their barriers and drain everyone left on the ship. Ben start the reactor overload sequence. He called out over the intercom, Captain, wait. Doctor. Kim's voice came back immediately. I have an idea, but I need everyone left on the ship to come to the bridge right now. Within minutes, the remaining crew members had gathered on the bridge, and Jake looked around at the dozen people who had chosen to stay behind and sacrifice their lives for the greater good. "What's your plan, Alex?" Jake asked. Kim was pale and shaking, but his voice was steady. "The entity feeds on isolated consciousness, but it has trouble with connected minds. And what if we link all of our minds together and create a feedback loop that overloads its feeding mechanism, Doctor?" Chun looked skeptical. "How do we link our minds together and we're not telepaths?" "Through our emotions and our bonds of friendship and love and trust," Dr. Kim replied, "the same way Jake and Lisa were able to resist its probes but amplified by all of us working together." Ben Rodriguez nodded slowly. "It's worth a try, and if it doesn't work, we can still trigger the reactor." Overload. Jake looked around at his crew and saw the determination in their faces, and he realized that these people had become more than colleagues over the years they had traveled together, and they were family in every way that mattered. "Everyone join hands," he said, and the crew formed a circle on the bridge with Jake and Lisa at the center. The alien entity was now close enough that they could see individual details on its surface, and it began sending multiple psychic probes toward the ship as it prepared to drain the minds of everyone aboard New Horizon. "Think about why you're here and think about the people you love and the bonds that connect us all together," Jake said. As the crew joined hands and focused their thoughts, something incredible began to happen. And Jake could feel the minds of his crew members connecting to his own and to each other, and their individual thoughts began to merge into something larger and more powerful than any of them could achieve alone. The alien entity's probes struck their combined consciousness, and instead of draining their minds, the feedback traveled back along the psychic connection, and Jake could feel the creature's confusion and pain as it tried to process emotions it had never encountered before: love and friendship and sacrifice and hope and all the things that made humans special flowed back into the entity's feeding mechanism, and it was like trying to swallow poison, and the creature began to convulse in space as its energy field fluctuated wildly. "It's working!" Lisa shouted as she squeezed Jake's hand tighter. The crew poured more emotion into their mental link, and Jake felt their combined love for each other and for the people they had saved and for humanity itself become a weapon that struck at the very heart of the alien construct. The entity tried to withdraw its probes, but it was too late, and the feedback loop had been established, and every attempt it made to drain their consciousness only resulted in more human emotion flowing into its mind and corrupting its feeding process. With a soundless scream that echoed through dimensions, the alien construct began to tear itself apart as billions of years of stored consciousness were released all at once, and the trapped minds of countless species found freedom in a burst of light that outshone the nearby star. The creature collapsed in on itself and vanished, leaving only empty space where it had been, and Jake opened his eyes to find his crew still holding hands and looking at each other in amazement. "Is it over?" Lisa asked. "It's over," Jake replied, and pulled her into his arms. Kim was already working at his console, analyzing the sensor readings. "The entity is completely gone, and the energy field that was jamming our communications has dissipated." Jake activated the ship's communication system. "New Horizon to all escape pods and Colony Base 1, and this is Captain Morrison, and the threat has been eliminated, and it's safe to return home." Rachel Martinez's voice came through clearly for the first time in days. "Captain, this is my sister Kate, and we can hear you perfectly, and people are starting to wake up from the comas, and whatever you did, it worked." Jake looked around at his crew and realized that they had discovered something more powerful than any weapon and more valuable than any technology, and they had learned that the connections between people and the love they shared could overcome any darkness. Lisa took his hand and smiled. "So what do we do now?" Jake looked out at the stars where the escape pods were already turning around to come home, and thought about the colony waiting for them on Kepler 442b and all the lives they would build together. "Now we go home," he said, "and we remember that sometimes the greatest strength comes from refusing to leave each other behind." The evacuation began at dawn ship time, and Jake Morrison stood in the main launch bay, watching thousands of frightened colonists board the escape pods while trying to maintain some semblance of order in what could only be described as controlled. Chaos children cried as they were separated from parents, who had to board different pods, and elderly colonists moved slowly through the lines, while younger people helped carry their belongings, and Jake felt his heart breaking as he watched families, torn apart by the cruel mathematics of survival. Lisa Park moved through the crowds, like a force of nature, organizing the boarding process and making sure that people with strong emotional bonds stayed together, because Dr. Kim's research had shown that connected minds were harder for the entity to drain. Keep families together as much as possible. Lisa called out to the loading crews and make sure married couples and close friends are on the same pods. Dr. Chian worked frantically in a corner of the launch bay, treating colonists who were showing signs of mental intrusion, and the number of affected people had grown to over 800, and Jake could see that some of them were already too far gone to save. A young mother named Susan Walsh approached Jake with her 6-year-old daughter clinging to her leg. "Captain Morrison, my husband is still in medical, and they won't let him leave, but there's no room for us on his pod, and I don't know what to do." Jake knelt down so he was at eye level with the little girl, who looked terrified and confused. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he asked gently. "Emma," the girl whispered. "Well, Emma, your daddy is going to be just fine, and we're going to make sure you and Mommy stay together, and everything is going to be okay," Jake said, even though he wasn't sure he believed his own words. Stood up and activated his communicator, Ben Rodriguez, to launch Bay 3 immediately. And when the chief engineer arrived, Jake explained the situation. "We can squeeze 3 more people on the pod 17, but it will be tight," Ben said after checking his data pad. Jake helped Susan and Emma board their assigned pod and watched as they were strapped into seats next to an elderly couple who immediately began fussing over the frightened child, and he realized that even in the midst of disaster, humans instinctively reached out to comfort each other. The alien construct was now only 6 hours away, and Jake could feel its presence pressing against the edges of his consciousness like a cold wind that chilled him to the bone, and he knew that time was running out faster than they had anticipated. Lisa appeared at his side, looking exhausted but determined. "We've loaded 47,000 people into the pods, but we still have 3,000 colonists who won't fit. What about the crew?" Jake asked. "Most of them are staying behind to help with the final launch sequence, but I've convinced about half of the essential personnel to evacuate with the colonists," Lisa replied. Jake nodded and tried not to think about the 3,000 people who would die with the ship, because there was no room for them in the escape pods, and he wondered how many sleepless nights he would have if he somehow survived this nightmare. Dear Har. Kim rushed up to them with his tablet showing new readings. "Captain, the entity has changed course, and it's moving faster than before, and I think it knows we're trying to evacuate." Jake felt ice form in his stomach, because if the alien construct reached them before they could finish the evacuation, then everyone would die, and their sacrifice would be meaningless. "How much time do we have?" he asked. 3 hours, maybe less, Doctor. Kim replied. Lisa grabbed Jake's arm. "We need to start the reactor overload sequence now, and give the evacuation pods more time to get clear." Jake shook his head. "If we start too early, the explosion might not be powerful enough to destroy the entity. And if we start too late, the pods won't be far enough away to survive the blast." The next 2 hours passed in a blur of activity as the remaining colonists were loaded into the final escape pods, and Jake found himself standing in the launch bay with only a few hundred people left aboard New Horizon. Most of the remaining crew members were volunteers who had chosen to stay behind and help with the final preparations, and Jake looked at their faces and saw the same quiet determination that had brought humanity to the stars. Ben Rodriguez approached him with the final technical specifications. "Captain, I've set up the reactor overload sequence to trigger from the bridge, and once you input the authorization codes, you'll have exactly 10 minutes before the explosion. What about you, Ben, and are you evacuating with the last pod?" Jake asked. The chief engineer shook his head. "Someone needs to monitor the reactors during the overload sequence to make sure nothing goes wrong. And that someone is me." Jake clasped Ben's shoulder. It's been an honor serving with you. Same here, Captain. Ben replied with a sad smile as the final escape pod prepared to launch. Jake stood with Lisa in the observation deck watching through the reinforced windows as 48,000 human beings fled into the darkness of space in a desperate attempt to survive. They're beautiful, Lisa said quietly as the pod spread out like a constellation of tiny stars against the black Jake put his arm around her and pulled her close. They're going to make it, Lisa, and they're going to build something wonderful on that planet, and our sacrifice won't be in vain. Lisa turned to face him, and Jake could see tears forming in her green eyes. Jake, there's something I need to tell you before we do this. What is it? He asked. I'm not evacuating, and I'm staying here with you, she said firmly. Jake felt panic grip his heart. Lisa, no. And you have to get on that pod, and you have to survive this. I won't leave you to face this alone, and we discovered together that emotional bonds can resist the entity's influence, and maybe, if we're together, we can find another way, Lisa said. Jake shook his head desperately. The explosion will kill us both, and there's no surviving what we're about to do. Lisa reached up and touched his face gently. I'd rather die with you than live without you, and I've made my choice. Jake wanted to argue, but he could see the absolute determination in her eyes, and he realized that nothing he could say would change her mind, and part of him was grateful that he wouldn't have to face the end alone. Final escape pod launched and disappeared into the darkness, leaving New Horizon empty, except for Jake and Lisa, and Ben Rodriguez and a handful of other volunteers who had chosen to stay behind. Jake activated the ship-wide intercom. All remaining crew members, this is Captain Morrison, and in 5 minutes, I will begin the reactor overload sequence. And if anyone wants to change their mind and take one of the emergency shuttles, there's still time. No one responded, and Jake felt a surge of pride in his crew because they had chosen to stand together even in the face of certain death. Lisa took his hand and squeezed it tightly. Whatever happens, Jake, I want you to know that I love you, and I've loved you for years. I love you too, Lisa, and I should have told you sooner, Jake replied. They walked together toward the bridge where Jake would input the codes that would destroy their ship and hopefully save the lives of everyone they were leaving behind. And as they entered the elevator, Lisa looked at him with tears in her eyes. With tears in her eyes, she said gently, please don't leave. Jake thought to himself and realized that she wasn't asking him to abandon his duty, but to let her share it. I won't leave you, Lisa, and we'll face this together, he said, and meant every word. The next 18 hours passed like a nightmare that Jake Morrison could not wake up from, and every minute brought them closer to a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life, however long that might be. The evacuation preparations were proceeding as quickly as possible, but the logistics of moving 50,000 people from cryo sleep to escape pods while maintaining life support and avoiding panic was proving more difficult than anyone had anticipated. Dr. Chun worked around the clock treating colonists who were showing signs of mental intrusion from the alien entity, and the number had grown to over 300 people. And Jake could see the exhaustion in her eyes every time she gave him an update. Lisa had barely left the bridge in the last day, and Jake found her there at 3 a.m. staring at the tactical display that showed the alien construct steadily gaining ground on their fleeing ship. You should get some sleep, he said as he approached her station, but she did not look up from the screen. I keep thinking there has to be another way. Jake and we're the smartest species that ever evolved on Earth, and there has to be something we're missing, Lisa replied, but her voice carried the weight of someone who had already accepted the inevitable. Jake sat down in the chair next to her, and for a moment, they just watched the blinking dot on the screen that represented something so alien and terrible that their minds could barely comprehend it. Lisa, there's something I need to tell you before this gets any worse, Jake said, and his heart was beating so hard he was sure she could hear it. She finally looked at him, and in the dim lighting of the night shift bridge, he could see the tears threatening to spill from her eyes. I know, Jake, and I've known for years, but we never had the right time to talk about it. I should have said something sooner and should have told you how I felt instead of hiding behind regulations and professional distance, Jake said, and reached over to take her hand. We both knew that getting involved would complicate things and make command decisions harder, but now that we're probably going to die. Anyway, maybe it doesn't matter, Lisa said with a sad smile. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, just holding hands and watching the stars, and Jake realized that this might be the only peaceful moment they would have before everything fell apart. The quiet was broken by Dr. Kim's voice over the intercom. Captain Morrison, please report to the medical bay immediately, and we have a situation. Jake and Lisa hurried through the corridors of New Horizon and found the medical bay in chaos, with Dr. Chun and her staff working frantically over several patients who were convulsing on examination tables. What's happening, Maya? Jake asked, as he watched the medical team trying to stabilize a young woman whose body was racked with violent spasms. The entity's influence is getting stronger, and it's no longer content to just probe minds, and now it's actively trying to drain consciousness from anyone who shows sensitivity to its presence, Dr. Chun replied while injecting sedatives into the convulsing woman Dr. Kim looked up from a computer terminal where he had been analyzing brain scans. Captain, I've discovered something important about how this thing operates, and it feeds on isolated consciousness, but it has trouble processing minds that are strongly connected to other minds. What do you mean connected? Lisa asked. Emotional bonds. Jake, in love and friendship and family relationships, and the stronger the emotional connection between two people, the harder it is for the entity to separate their consciousness and drain them, Dr. Kim explained. Jake felt a spark of hope for the first time in days. Are you saying that people who are close to each other are naturally resistant to this thing? To some degree, yes, but it's more than that, and I think the entity evolved to hunt solitary minds and creatures that live alone, but humans are social beings, and our consciousness is designed to link with others. And that makes us naturally resistant to its feeding process, Dr. Kim said. Dr. Chun looked up from her patient, who had finally stopped convulsing. That would explain why the reconnaissance team survived initial contact, and you three were strongly bonded by years of working together, and your emotional connections protected you. Lisa grabbed Jake's arm. This changes everything, and if emotional bonds can protect people, then maybe we don't have to sacrifice the ship and everyone on it. But Dr. Kim shook his head sadly. The protection only works to a limited extent, and if the entity gets close enough, it can overcome even the strongest bonds and drain anyone it wants. And we're still facing the same problem. Jake felt his brief hope crumble. But then another thought occurred to him. What about the people on Kepler 442b? And do they know what's coming for them? I've been trying to reach them, but the entity is still jamming our communications, and we can't get a warning through. Lisa, replied Communications Officer Rachel Martinez's voice came over the intercom. Captain, we're receiving a transmission from the planetary colony, but the signal is very weak and breaking up. Jake and Lisa raced back to the bridge where Rachel was working frantically to clean up the incoming signal, and after several minutes of adjustments, a voice came through the static. New Horizon, this is Kate Martinez at Colony Base 1, and we have a serious problem here, and people are starting to fall into comas for no medical reason, and our doctors can't figure out what's causing it. Rachel's face went white when she heard her sister's voice, and Jake realized that the entity's influence was already reaching the planetary colony, even though it was still hours away from their current position. Kate, this is Captain Morrison, and you need to listen carefully because your lives depend on it, Jake said into the microphone. The signal was too broken for real conversation, but Jake managed to convey the basic threat and warned them to keep people in groups and maintain close emotional connections because isolation made them vulnerable to the entity's feeding process. When the transmission finally cut out completely, Rachel was crying openly, and Jake put his hand on her shoulder. We're going to find a way to save them, Rachel, and I promise we won't abandon your sister. But even as he made the promise, Jake knew that their options were running out, and the alien construct was getting closer every hour, and soon they would have to make the final decision about detonating New Horizon. Ben Rodriguez appeared on the bridge looking exhausted. Captain, I've finished the calculations for the reactor overload, and we can create an explosion. Powerful enough to destroy the entity, but someone will have to stay behind to trigger the detonation sequence manually. How long would they have after starting the sequence? Lisa asked. About 10 minutes before the reactors reach critical mass. And that should be enough time to get the evacuation pods clear of the blast radius. Ben replied. Jake nodded grimly. Then we proceed with the evacuation, and I'll stay behind to trigger the explosion. Like hell you will, Lisa said immediately. I'm the one who discovered this thing, and I should be the one to finish it. That's not how command works, Lisa, and the captain goes down with his ship, and that's not negotiable. Jake replied, but even as they argued about who would make the ultimate sacrifice, Jake could see in Lisa's eyes that she had no intention of letting him face this alone, and he realized that their emotional bond might be strong enough to protect them both, but only if they were together. The alien entity was now less than 12 hours away and growing stronger with each passing minute, and Jake knew that whatever decision they made would have to be made soon, because time was running out for everyone aboard New Horizon and everyone waiting on the planet below. The rescue came just in time, and Jake Morrison had never felt more relieved than when he saw Lisa's scout ship dock with New Horizon 17 hours later, and the first thing he noticed when she stepped off the shuttle was the haunted look in her eyes. Dear Kim needed immediate medical attention and was rushed to the ship's medical bay, while Mike Davis sat in the debriefing room with his hands shaking as he tried to describe what they had experienced, and Jake could see that all three members of the reconnaissance team had been changed by their encounter with the alien sphere. It's following us, Jake, and I can still feel it at the edges of my mind like a cold whisper that won't go away, Lisa said as she sat across from him in his ready room, and her voice carried a tremor that he had never heard before. Jake reached across the table and took her hand in his and felt how cold her fingers were despite the normal temperature of the ship. Tell me everything, Lisa, and don't leave out any details, because we need to understand what we're dealing with. Lisa closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them again, Jake could see the fear there mixed with determination. It's not just a machine or even a living creature in any sense we understand, and it's something that exists partially in our reality and partially in the realm of consciousness itself. Dr. Maya Chun, the ship's chief medical officer, entered the ready room, looking grim, and she carried a data pad filled with test results that Jake suspected contained bad news. Captain, I've examined all three members of the reconnaissance team, and their brain scans show unusual activity in the areas associated with memory and consciousness, and it's as if something has been probing their minds and leaving traces behind, Dr. Chun said as she handed Jake the data pad. Jake studied the medical readings, and even though he was not a doctor, he could see the abnormal patterns in the brainwave data, and he felt his stomach sink as the implications became clear. Is the effect permanent, Maya? He asked. I don't know yet, but I'm more concerned about what Dr. Kim told me during his examination, and he says the entity showed him images of other worlds and planets that had been completely drained of all conscious life. Dr. Chun replied. Lisa nodded grimly. It's a harvester, Jake, and it feeds on the minds of sentient beings, and it's been dormant for who knows how long, waiting for someone to stumble into its territory. Jake stood up and walked to the viewport in his ready room, where he could see the stars streaming past as New Horizon continued on its course toward their destination, and he realized that they were leading 50,000 innocent people directly into the path of something that could consume their very souls. How long do we have before it catches up to us? He asked. At our current speed, maybe 36 hours. But, Jake, there's something else you need to know. And the construct isn't just chasing us randomly, Lisa said, and her voice grew even more serious. What do you mean? It's hurting us and pushing us toward our destination system, and I think it knows about the colony that's already been established on Kepler 442b, Lisa replied. The blood drained from Jake's face as he realized what she was saying, because there were already 200,000 people living on the planet they had been traveling toward for 3 years. And if this entity was driving them there on purpose, then it was planning to feed on every human consciousness in the entire system We have to warn them, Jake said in Reach. For his communicator, I already tried, but something is jamming our long-range communications, and we can't get a message through to the planetary colony. Lisa replied, DR. Chun cleared her throat, and both Jake and Lisa turned to look at her. There's something else. Captain and I have been monitoring the colonists in the cryo bays, and some of them are starting to show the same unusual brain activity that I detected. In the reconnaissance team, Jake felt ice-cold fear grip his heart, because if the entity could affect people even through the cryo-sleep systems, then nowhere. On the ship was truly safe, and they were all being slowly prepared for harvest like cattle. Being led to slaughter. How many people are affected? He asked. 17 so far, but the number is growing, and the effect seems to be spreading through the ship in a pattern that suggests the entity is selecting specific individuals. Doctor. Chun said. Lisa stood up abruptly and began pacing around the small, ready room. It's testing us in learning how human consciousness works, and each person it touches teaches it more about how to efficiently drain our minds. Jake activated the ship. Wide intercom system, and his voice echoed through every corridor and compartment of New Horizon. All senior staff report to conference room. One immediately, and this is not a drill. 20 minutes later, the ship's senior officers sat around the conference table listening in stunned silence as Jake explained the situation, and the faces around the room grew more grim with each. Detail Chief Engineer Ben Rodriguez was the first to speak. Captain, we could try to change course and avoid the destination system entirely, but our fuel reserves are calculated for the direct route, and any major course change would leave us stranded in deep space. What about fighting this thing? Asked Security Chief Amanda Walsh, who had taken Mike Davis's place while he recovered from his mental trauma. DR. Kim, who had insisted on attending the meeting despite his condition, shook his head weakly. Our weapons are designed for conventional threats, and this entity exists partially outside normal space and time, and I don't think we can hurt it with anything we have. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the hopeless nature of their situation, and Jake could see the fear in their eyes mixed with the determination that had carried them all through 3 years of deep space travel. There has to be something we can do, said Navigation Officer Carol Turner. We can't just give up and let this thing consume 50,000 innocent people. Lisa had been quiet during most of the discussion, but now she spoke up. Actually, there might be one option, but it will require someone to make the ultimate sacrifice. All eyes turned to her, and Jake felt his heart skip a beat because he could already guess what she was thinking. If we overload the ship's fusion reactors, we could create an artificial nova that would destroy both us and the entity, but the explosion would need to be triggered manually, and whoever stays behind to do it wouldn't survive, Lisa said quietly. The conference room erupted in voices as everyone began talking at once, but Jake held up his hand for silence, and when the room quieted, he looked directly at Lisa. How many people could we evacuate in the escape pods? He asked. The pods have a maximum capacity of 48,000 if we pack them beyond safety limits, but that still leaves 2,000 people who would have to stay behind, Ben Rodriguez answered after consulting his engineering specifications. Then we start preparing the evacuation immediately, Jake said, and his voice carried the authority of absolute command. DR. Chun leaned forward. Captain, there's one more thing you should know, and the people we evacuate in the pods might not be safe either, and if this entity can affect minds through the ship's hull, then it might be able to reach people in the escape pods as well. Lisa nodded. Which is why the explosion has to happen before the entity gets close enough to start draining the evacuated colonists, and timing will be everything. Jake looked around the table at the faces of his senior staff and saw the same resolve in their eyes that had brought them all this far from Earth, and he knew that whatever happened in the next 36 hours would define not just their fate, but the fate of every human being in the Kepler 442 system. All right, people. We have work to do, and Ben, I want you to start calculating the exact specifications for the reactor overload, and Maya begin preparing the colonists for emergency evacuation, and Lisa coordinate with Amanda on security protocols for the evacuation. Jake said as the meeting broke up, and his officers filed out of the conference room. Jake remained seated and stared at the star charts displayed on the wall screen and wondered if he was making the right choice or if he was about to lead his people to their deaths in a desperate gamble that might not even work. The stars looked different today, and Captain Jake Morrison could not shake the feeling that something was wrong. He stood on the bridge of the colony ship New Horizon, watching the endless black of space through the main viewport, and felt a chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with the ship's climate control systems. The massive vessel had been traveling for 3 years, now carrying 50,000 sleeping colonists toward their new home on Kepler 442b, and Jake had grown used to the routine of deep space travel, but today felt different somehow, and he could not put his finger on what was bothering him. Captain were receiving something strange on long-range sensors, called out Communications Officer Rachel Martinez from her station near the back of the bridge, and her voice carried a note of concern that made Jake turn away from the viewport. "What kind of strange, Rachel?" Jake asked as he walked over to her station and leaned down to look at the readouts on her screen. "It's coming from the direction of our destination system, sir, but it's not like anything I've ever seen before, and the computer can't identify the signal pattern," Rachel said while adjusting the controls and trying to clean up the static. "Field transmission." Jake frowned and tapped his communicator. "Commander Park to the bridge, please," he said, and within minutes, Lisa Park emerged from the elevator looking alert. Despite having just finished her cycle, Lisa had been Jake's second in command for 8 years now, and he trusted her judgment more than anyone else on the ship. And when she looked at him with those sharp green eyes, he felt the familiar flutter in his chest that he always tried to ignore. "What's the situation, Jake?" Lisa asked as she approached the communication station. "We're picking up some kind of distress signal from the advanced scout fleet, but it's not coming through clearly, and Rachel says the computer can't make sense of it," Jake explained while gesturing toward the screen. Lisa studied the readouts for several minutes, and Jake watched her face grow more concerned as she analyzed the data, and finally she looked up at him with worry written across her features. "This isn't just interference, Jake, and these aren't standard distress protocols either, and whatever is sending this signal is using technology I don't recognize," she said quietly. Jake felt his stomach tighten, because Lisa Park knew more about alien technology than anyone else on the ship, and if she didn't recognize something, then it was probably not good news for them. "How long until we reach the scout fleet's last known position?" Jake asked. "At current speed, about 18 hours, sir," replied Navigation Officer Ben Rodriguez from his station at the front of the bridge. Jake thought for a moment and then made his decision. "Lisa, I want you to take a reconnaissance team and use the fast scout ship to get there ahead of us and find out what happened to our advance team. I'll take Dr. Kim in a full security detail," Lisa said, already moving toward the elevator. "Be careful out there, Lisa, and keep an open channel at all times, because something about this whole situation doesn't feel right to me," Jake said, and their eyes met for just a moment longer than was strictly professional. 6 hours later, Lisa's scout ship reached the coordinates where the advanced fleet should have been waiting for them, but instead of finding the 3 ships they expected, they found empty space and something else that made Lisa's blood run cold. "What in the hell is that thing?" muttered Security Chief Mike Davis from the co-pilot's seat as he stared at the massive structure floating in the darkness ahead of them. "Dr. Alex Kim pressed his face against the small porthole window, and his scientific training kicked in as he began analyzing what they were seeing. "It appears to be some kind of sphere, but the materials don't match anything in our databases, and the energy readings are off the charts." The object was enormous, easily 10 times the size of New Horizon, and its surface seemed to shimmer and shift like liquid metal in the starlight, and as they watched, strange patterns of light pulsed across its hull in hypnotic waves. "Lisa, are you getting this?" came Jake's voice over the radio from 18 hours away. "We're seeing it, Jake, but I don't know what we're seeing, and there's no sign of our advanced team anywhere," Lisa replied while trying to keep her voice steady despite the growing dread in her chest. Dr. Kim was busy with his instruments, and suddenly he looked up with alarm written across his face. The energy signature is changing, and it's getting stronger, and I'm detecting some kind of scanning beam directed at our ship. Lisa felt the hair on the back of her neck stand up as a strange humming sound began to fill the scout ship, and the lights on the control panels began to flicker in rhythm with the pulses coming from the alien sphere. "It knows we're here," whispered Mike Davis, and his hand moved instinctively toward his weapon. The alien construct began to move then, not through space like a normal ship, but by bending space around itself. And Lisa realized with growing horror that it was approaching them at an impossible speed. All hands prepare for emergency acceleration. She shouted into the ship's intercom system and slammed the throttles forward, sending their small vessel racing away from the mysterious sphere at maximum thrust. But even as they fled, Lisa could feel something probing at the edges of her mind like invisible fingers, trying to pry open her thoughts, and she fought against the intrusion while sweat beaded on her forehead. From the effort DR, Kim was still working frantically with his instruments when he suddenly cried out and grabbed his head in pain. "It's in my mind, and it's trying to read my thoughts, and it feels like ice water flowing through my brain." The same thing was happening to Mike Davis, and Lisa could see him struggling to maintain control as the alien presence pushed deeper into their consciousness, and she realized that whatever this thing was, it was not just scanning their ship, but their minds as well. "Jake, we need immediate extraction," Lisa managed to say into the radio, despite the growing pressure in her skull. "This thing is some kind of psychic entity, and it's trying to invade our minds." The response from New Horizon was immediate. "We're coming, Lisa. Just hold on and get as far away from that thing as you can." But even as their scout ship raced through space at maximum speed, the alien sphere kept pace with them effortlessly. And Lisa began to understand that they were not dealing with just advanced technology, but something far more dangerous and alien than they had ever imagined. "Dar." Kim suddenly straightened up in his seat, and his eyes went wide with terror. "I can hear it talking, and it's not using words but images and emotions, and it's showing me things and terrible things." "What kind of things, Alex?" Lisa demanded while fighting to keep their ship on course as the alien presence continued its assault on their minds. Planets and empty planets where there used to be life in billions of minds, screaming in darkness, and it's hungry Lisa, and it's been waiting for US and waiting so long for something to feed on. "Doctor," Kim said in a voice filled with horror. The implications of what he was saying hit Lisa like a physical blow, because if this thing had been consuming entire worlds, then the 50,000 colonists sleeping aboard New Horizon were walking into a trap that none of them could possibly imagine. The alien sphere sent another pulse of energy toward their fleeing ship, and this time Lisa felt the presence in her mind shift and change as if it was learning from each contact and adapting its methods to better penetrate human consciousness. "It's getting stronger," she whispered, and fought against the growing darkness that was trying to engulf her thoughts while desperately hoping that Jake and the New Horizon would reach them in time.